We see that it's partially because he desires this deep evidence of experiencing God on a personal level, because what does Moses desire most of all? He desires to know God. But we also see him requesting this, that God would do an action to reveal his heart for his people. The people that Moses is a part of, that he is interceding for. And God responds with an answer. He says, yes, I will. But for me to show you my glory, you're going to need to go to this rock. And in Exodus, it actually says you're going to need to go to the rock. And as you go to this rock, I need you to cling to it, to go into the cleft of the rock, to be shielded by it. And I will also use my hand, and I will use my hand to cover the rock as I pass. And as I pass, I will remove my hand so that you can see my back. This rock was a physical rock. It was a place where Moses actually went and stood behind. But this rock is so much more. This rock is a symbol of the cornerstone of the temple, which would be the dwelling place of God. This cornerstone that temple will be built upon. This rock is a rock in which we stand. The rock that shielded Moses was a foreshadowing of the rock which our faith would be built upon. This rock is Christ. This rock is the person of Jesus Christ. Just as the rock shielded Moses from experiencing the full glory of God, because if you see the full glory of God, God states it himself, no man has seen me and lived. So this rock stood in between, so that Moses could experience God, so that Moses could engage in God's glory and yet live. This rock is a person of Jesus Christ. The beauty of this church is God foreshadowing and pointing us here in this account toward the person of Christ, towards our perfect mediator. It is not a mistake that God has Moses stand behind this rock. Once again, we see that this thread that we've been walking through as we've been going through this account in Exodus, we see this thread continuing that for us to properly worship God, we need someone to intercede on our behalf. We have seen this through all of Exodus. We will see it in the priests. We will see it in the prophets and the good kings in the rest of the Old Testament. And we will see it in the New Testament in the person of Christ in the Gospels. Christ is the fulfillment of all three of these offices. He is the perfect high priest. He is the one that has been prophesied, and he is our perfect king. And he's standing in our stead so that we can now engage with God, so that we can see God's glory and live. Christ is our rock, and he stands between us. Again, this morning we are talking about a faithful father leading his children to restored relationship through the rock, which in he receives all the glory. Continuing on, we come into chapter 34, and we see God reinstituting or restoring the covenant that had been made with the forefathers. We see God's instruction, but church, in verses 6 and 7, we see something that is just absolutely amazing. Who he is to Moses. It is so beautiful and so glorious. We see God stating who he is and who he will be to his people. He says in verses 6 and 7, I am merciful. I am gracious. I am slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love. I am faithful. I have steadfast love for thousands. I forgive iniquity, transgression, and sin. I am just and wrathful, and I am reigning in authority. We see after this declaration from God of who he is that Moses, all of a sudden, he comes in and goes, he includes himself in the plea of needing forgiveness. He says, forgive us our iniquities. Forgive us our transgressions. Because he's standing in the glorious presence of God, talking with him. Though he is an intercessor, he is still a man and recognizes his desperate need for someone to stand in his stead as well. We continue on and we see the renewal of God and his covenant with it, or the renewal of God's covenant with Israel. We see the stipulations and the actions that God sets in place, the 10 Commandments, the feasts of unleavened bread, Passover, Sabbath, the Feast of Week, the Feast of Ingathering, and the instructions for those of how to appropriately work. For people, and then we see Moses exit the tent. To his people, we see the people the only two times Moses removed the veil from his face. Other than that, we see Moses walking around with the veil to shield the people from the glory of God that he is reflecting. I often, I've read this account before, and I look at it and I'm like, man, that'd be so cool to experience having a shining face from being in the presence of God. Or seeing someone that had a shining face from being in the presence of God. Yet when I look at myself, I know that I would respond in fear. I know that I would be awestruck and astounded, because there's no way that I could stand in boldness before even that man if his face was reflecting the full glory of God. But church, if you would, I need everyone to turn with me to 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 12 through 18. And I probably should have made it a slide, but I didn't. So I'll give you a minute to turn there. It's 2 Corinthians 3, verses 12 through 18. And I'm going to go ahead and read it. Since we have such hope, we are very bold, not like Moses, who would put a veil over his face so that the Israelites might not gaze at the outcome of what was being brought to an end. But their minds were hardened. For to this day, when they read the Old Covenant, the same veil remains unlifted, because only through Christ is it taken away. Yes, to this day, whenever Moses is read, and in that whenever Moses, it is talking about the law. Whenever the law is read, a veil lies over their hearts. But when one turns to the Lord, the veil is removed. Now the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit is, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. And we all, listen to this, church, and we all, with unveiled faces, beholding the glory of God, are being transformed into the same image from one degree of glory to another. For it comes from the Lord, who is the Spirit. A faithful father leading his children or his people to a restored relationship through the rock, through our mediator, our intercessor, in which he receives all of the glory. Church, we live in a culture that instructs us and encourages us to discover who we are, or to even choose who we are. To pull ourselves up by the bootstraps and go fix ourselves. To focus on us. We're in the I/me culture. Yet here in this account in Exodus, we see the Father instructing us to do something that is the exact opposite. We see him, just as he instructed Moses, instructing us as his children to do the same. He says, come to the rock. Rest in it. And behold who I am. We see that God is telling us to come to Christ in whatever way we are. And come behold him, to look upon him, to see his glory, to see who he is. And he tells us who he is. He says that he is forgiving, that he is loving, that he is long-suffering. He says that he is patient and kind and merciful. He says that he is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. He is all-knowing and ever-present. And from this position of authority, he declares us as his children. And as his children, we, through our mediator, are sanctified, we are justified, and we are forgiven in fullness. That is the position as his children that we hold. What he desires us to do is to behold him. He desires to be known. He told us who he is. He wants us to know him. And he's created a way for us to be able to approach him in boldness, not having to veil our face or hide. He wants us to be able to approach him as a child would their father, because he desires to be known by his children, by his people. But how do we behold him? Just behold God, behold